Okay, so is climate change for real? Is that the question?
Yes.
So almost all scientists in the world seem to think it's real. And I think I go by science, so I would say it's real. I think that where people get confused is when there's a distinction that's made between uncertainty and doubt, and most people don't see that difference. So when scientists tend to say things like there's a 95% certainty or a uncertainty band around around results, then people seem to think that it's not going to happen. And what scientists are doing is they're actually trying to talk in science language and not communicate in a layperson's language. And so I think that's a big problem, and really what they're doing is they're sowing some seeds of doubt when they do that in a way. When scientists speak in terms of uncertainty, for the general public that's confusing, and politicians and other people can use that and have tended to sow, I think, some seeds of doubt, whether it's happening or not. So it is happening, it is real, it's just how fast it's happening and what the rate is, that's still to be determined. There are different models that tell you what kinds of things are happening. But I think it's that doubt that is sowed in the minds of people because of the language that's used. And it's very important to know that uncertainty bands around modeling is different. That is different from doubt. So there is no doubt that climate change is happening. It's just the rate and the when it will actually, when some of these things will arrive. So if you're talking about sea level rise, you don't know exactly how much by exactly when, but you do know it's happening already. So there are historical markers, there are trends that have shown that climate, the Earth and the planet is warming, and that is causing some large systemic changes. That means your ocean currents are changing, and that's going to change the way your storms affect the land. So for example, in Hawaii, we've got, it's very rare that there will be hurricanes, that hurricanes make landfall in Hawaii, but the track of these hurricanes is changing because of climate change and because of ocean currents and because of the warming of the oceans and the warming of the air. So the tracks for hurricanes are actually coming to Hawaii, and it's quite likely that there will be more hurricanes hitting Hawaii itself in the future. And around the world, we're finding that storms are more...
To bring it as basic a level as any common person can relate to. Like if I live in a village and I'm seeing more frequent landslides happening, am I able to relate it to climate change, or do I just see it as it rained too much this rainy season?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah. If the citizen, if a common citizen or the lay public, as an individual, you probably notice that there have been changes over your lifetime, say, even if your lifetime is 30 years or so, you'll notice that things have changed. There are fluctuations from year to year. So, like you said, for landslides, or the example I have is, so my husband and I, we got married in February in 1992, and we noticed that in Washington, D.C., the maple flowers were blooming, right? So every year we look for that around our anniversary, and we found that it's actually changed in time, that it's actually moved to almost a month later, and that the seasons are doing different things and plants are doing different things. So you might notice this, as the lay person might notice that this is something that's happening in their own garden. They may see that some particular flower that blooms every year, or fruit that fruits every year, is not doing that around the same time, that there's more than a few weeks difference. And when you see these changes, that's an evidence of climate change. If you see there are more landslides or more rainfall, that is an evidence of, or it can be an evidence of climate change. And sometimes it's just that, yeah, it's raining a little more. But we have noticed that there is just more, and it's more severe. So you might find periods of drought, so where the rain hasn't come, and then suddenly there's a lot of rain. And it didn't ever used to happen like that. It would be, you'd have a certain amount of rain every month, and it was quite predictable. And now it's fairly unpredictable. It isn't following the patterns. So I think for the layperson, that is something that they can see.
It isn't the polar bears that we are trying to save. It's humans we are trying to save. And if we don't take care, the grains that they have been cultivating would no longer grow. Cropping patterns would change. Yeah? Their lifestyles would change. It'll become colder. We'll have more floods. We'll have cloudbursts more frequently than we used to have. So, what the scientists possibly need to communicate to that common person is, there is a relationship. Even the stray incidents that we are seeing, is it possible to relate it to the big question of climate change?
That's not the problem with citizens taking climate action is not that we don't have enough information. The problem is that we haven't communicated that information. So that's really the bottleneck for the layperson.
Yeah.
Is how do you relate it to the layperson's terms? How do you relate it to your everyday life, and what does it mean for you? So it could mean, because it's not necessarily life-threatening at that time, so it's not just about disasters and landslides or storms where people die. It's also about just the sort of slow march of change, but it's not that slow because it's actually changing so fast that your crops cannot keep up with it. Weather and climate.
Weather is a little shorter, climate is a little longer.
Exactly. So weather is something that happens on a day-to-day basis, but climate happens over a period of time. It can be a few months, it can be a few years, and of course centuries and millennia. So one of the things that there are these monks in Japan, the Shinto monks, and they believe that there is a Shinto god that crosses a lake once it's frozen over and goes to see, it's a male god that goes to see the female god. And there's a time when that lake freezes over. And these monks have kept records of time when that lake actually freezes over. So they've been doing that for 700 years. And climate scientists are actually using that data, which is the longest known record of keeping some kind of climate data. They've kept that for 700 years. And so scientists are using that to figure out, has climate changed over that time? Has the time when it actually froze, when that lake froze, has that shifted over time? And so we don't need to know, we don't need to look at 700 years of information to know that climate is changing. I think because you're gardeners and you actually work with your gardens and you know when things bloom and when they die and so on, you know that climate has changed in even the past, in your lifetime. And in the last 150 years or so, it's changed very rapidly. So what has brought that change about? It's the way that humans have, most scientists now are very certain that it's the way that humans burn fossil fuel energy and get energy from fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are coal, oil, natural gas, those kinds of things. So when you use that energy and it emits certain gases, it's like a greenhouse. So if you know what a greenhouse is like, which all of you do, you know, it traps the heat, and the earth behaves like that, where it traps the heat. So it behaves like a greenhouse, and this is called the greenhouse gas effect. So it is, these are these gases, it's called the greenhouse effect, and it's the greenhouse gases, these gases, which are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. These are all gases, especially carbon dioxide and methane. These are two gases that produce that heating effect for the Earth. There's a big debate in the United States that humans have not caused it. We have a Secretary of State and a head of our Environmental Protection Agency who says he does not believe that carbon dioxide is contributing to these things. But these are politicians. You know, they're going to say things to get votes. So these are, but the scientists are, they're very certain that human causes are leading to climate change. So what does that mean for all of us and for people in different parts of the world? So in Delhi, it's going to mean that you're going to have hotter summers, you're going to have more droughts. When you do have hotter summers and more drought, you're going to have less vegetation. So fewer trees, or trees will die over periods of time. Trees don't die just in one summer, but they will take longer to die. But other vegetation will die. Then when you get a rainfall or a storm, then you get that effect of erosion. So in the past, you would get rainfall on vegetation that would then, things would stay together. The soil doesn't just run away. So these are things that will happen to interiors of the continents, of all the continents. They're saying will be hotter and drier. For example, in Hawaii has sort of sea level, things at the sea level, but it also has very high mountains. And so as you go up the mountains, it gets colder. And you get different plants, but you also get different animals. And you also have a place where there are no mosquitoes because it's too cold for them. Now as it gets warmer, those mosquitoes are able to go up higher. And those birds that lived up in those areas, they're susceptible to malaria, actually, avian malaria. So mosquitoes have actually killed off more than 90% of the bird species in Hawaii, of the native birds. With some Pacific Islanders who said that they've been seeing rainy seasons now for more than half the year. So more than half the year it's raining. And it's not a good thing for the crops because the things that so plant is going to want, certain plants are going to want a certain amount of water. You give them more water, it's actually going to die. It's not going to live. So these are so that's why I like to talk to kitchen garden groups because they really know about plants and how changing weather, changing climate is not really good for the plants that you're used to having, especially the plants that are used to growing here. So you might find that you'll get other plants that you can grow here, plants that never used to grow here before. But plants that used to grow here before, you probably can't get those too. So these are the effects you're going to see. Now imagine those effects for food crops. So food that you could grow here cannot grow here anymore. That's going to have a big effect on people. It's going to have when you have food prices that change, you actually have revolutions around that. People actually riot around that, right? Because food prices go up. Things are hard to buy. People are going to, So you can see that actually even though the United States government, this current administration doesn't believe in climate change, like it's a religion to believe in it. They don't believe in climate change, but the rest of the government has been putting in place a lot of things. Even the military is actually quite involved in climate change issues and looking at how can we adapt to climate change. Because for the military, this is going to be a big security issue. So places where climate will cause, first of all, wars, may cause refugees to come out of those wars, may cause refugees to come to our countries, to India as well, from other countries. So for the military, this is a big concern, and they've actually been talking about this as they call it a stress multiplier. So there's already stress on the system, and the changing climate multiplies that stress, makes it bigger. So these are issues that we're facing in poor and rich countries, whatever you want to call them, developing nations, all of these. So the international negotiations that I go to, the countries are trying to decide what they're going to do about these issues. So this is all at the government ministerial level, the foreign ministers and the environment ministers and so on. Government of India also works on these things, your Pusa Institute and so on. They all work on these, that's all part of that food security and keeping, they keep the source materials of these, they store them and they work with these materials. So that's something, and I also think that there are some interesting citizen projects which can be done here as well, and it's keeping that information for scientists to use, like what is happening in your gardens. So these are called citizen science projects. In schools as well they're doing this. So for example, what they're doing is they're taking any piece of land, like if you've got, for any sort of garden that you've got, you have children or adults looking at, they fill out a form online which says, these are the species of flowers or plants, and this is when I've noticed it flowering. This is when I've noticed it fruiting. This is when I've noticed, the buzz or whatever. So it's all, there's a term for this when you look at the different life stages of a plant. It's called phenology. So they're looking at all these phenology information. And these are children and adults who are just putting this into the forms that go online onto the website. And then they have a GPS location so they can figure out where these things are. And it goes into a big database that scientists can then use to mark trends, like, oh, over time in this particular place, you found that, you don't get flowers in your cucumber vines until May, but it used to be February, whatever, I don't know when cucumber vines flower over here, but, so things like that, they keep that kind of information, and this is something that citizens are doing, that children are doing right from the, they learn about botany, they learn about plants, they learn how to keep that information, how to send it. You can do it one time or you can do it over time. But as more and more people get involved, that's something that they're helping scientists to keep that information. There's also another interesting aspect with all of this, which is the cultural aspect with plants, because a lot of festivals and so on are affiliated with, they're connected with seasons, and so you use different plants in those seasons, you do different things with the plants and with the food and so on. Those things are going to change, as so you may not be able to have the things you're used to having on Holi and or Diwali or Basant Panchami. You may not have those things anymore.
Yes.
Because of changing climate. So it's going to affect your culture and the stories that you tell your children, and that's passed down. So we're changing not just the natural world, we're changing our culture, we're changing our history when we do these things. So we're changing our health, we're changing our food. So it's really changing everything. And the impacts of that are places, you could look at it as this is a huge problem and what can I do? But you could also look at it, this is a huge problem and anything I do is going to help. So any interest I have, if I'm interested in health, if I'm interested in science, if I'm interested in food security, if I'm interested in doing research on mosquitoes, there are so many different things you can do that contribute to the information. How do you get people to change their behavior in what they use, how they commute to work, what sorts of, how much electricity they use, because all of these things lead to emissions, which are one of the biggest problems of climate change, right? So, which is causing climate change. So, you know, in India, electricity is expensive and people are conscious of how much electricity they use. But at the same time, where that electricity comes from is also important. So those large policy changes would have to happen at a different level, and that's a different engagement, right? So you're looking at policymakers who, where they get pressure from citizen groups to move to solar or wind or whatever else is renewable energy. And you're looking at also how else can you change behavior? So there are incentives. So you can do rebates and subsidies for things. So you change behavior through the price mechanism, right? So sort of speak like an economist a little bit. But basically, if you change the price, you can either punish people or you can reward them, right? And so that's another big policy instrument that we haven't been very effective at using for climate change purposes. So I think that would be another, if you're looking at how a layperson can impact action at a higher level, is joining groups that are working to affect change at the policymaking level or at the legislation level, where you're trying to get rebates or you're trying to fine people for certain actions and activities so that they change behavior en masse, right? So it's for everybody that it changes behavior. You're not trying to convince everyone, you're just using that one mechanism of price to convince people. So you also have to be careful that you're not using it too much, because if you use it too much, then you have a revolt of some sort, and then that government gets, you know, in trouble. So that's why that's a difficult mechanism. Economists love it, but politicians don't.
Action has to be taken today, there is no tomorrow. And so they have to, at some level, start believing that it is for real, changes are drastic, and there will be no going back unless we do something today. How do we convince them of that?
If I knew the answer to that, we'd have done it, right? It's not that simple. So one big problem is that it's not an immediate life-threatening issue. It's something that's going to come down the road, right? So it's already happening, but when you look at high temperatures here in India, for example, temperatures that have been hotter. So this is the hottest year on record ever in history in the world, right? But instead of thinking of it as this is the hottest year, I would say we should think of it as this is the coldest year for the next 150. So it's just going to get hotter. And that's what we need to explain and bring out there to people. So your electricity bills are going to go up because you're going to use air conditioning if you can afford air conditioning. If you can't afford air conditioning, you know, you're going to have some trouble. You're going to have some health issues. If you're old and you cannot get your elderly parents to the hospital, or the electricity failures happen, then you're going to have some health issues, some fatalities, there are going to be all of these issues. They're already happening in India. So if it's going to get hotter and not cooler, and you're already seeing these impacts, and I think it's very logical as to what the results are going to be, which is you're just going to have more of what you have now. So more droughts, more rainfall and floods, more mosquito-borne diseases, more chemical and other wastes that have been flooded, and then heat-related deaths. That's going to be a big one. India actually is going to be one of the worst hit in the world. So India really needs to do something, and needs to help other countries do something as well. So it's not just India that's emitting, obviously. So this is why collective action is what needs to be taken at the global level, at the national level, and at the subnational as well as individual level. So we all need to be doing this collective action.
As of today, the common person doesn't even know how various pollinators, for example, impact his crop produce. They don't even know that. So we need to, come to that level. Science has to come to that level. Only then everybody would join the effort.
Right. So I think that's a really good point. But it's difficult to explain to people all the intricate relationships if they're not interested in botany or pollinators or And so you're not going to grab a hold of people and say, hey, I want to tell you something about pollinators, you know. So I think that it really needs to meet people at their interest level. And it's really about, for us, we think about things like, if in Hawaii, for example, we have just, you know, in Honolulu, there are very few roads, main roads, you know, so if that road gets flooded, then it's very difficult to go to the grocery store. So it's a huge inconvenience. Okay, if it happens once in your lifetime, you may not care. But if it starts to happen every month, then that's going to be a pain, right? You're going to think about moving. So it may not be life-threatening, but it's a huge inconvenience. I think we need to meet some people at that level, that this is going to be an inconvenience. Then people who are more interested in things, I think we need to meet them at a different level, where you're talking about more engagement with things like knowledge about pollinators, or people who care about species loss, people who care about maybe even how their how their gardens are going to do, or what their crops are going to do. So for farmers, that's going to be a different message. For the U.S. military, that's a different message. So it's at different levels that message needs to happen.
Do some of these things need to be part of the syllabus for schools, for example, elementary schools? That isn't something that happened as yet. Can scientists start looking at, you know, introducing it as part of the curriculum?
Yeah, so there are things happening like that.
At different levels. Mm-hmm. When I introduce it for primary classes, I am doing it at one level. When I am introducing it for colleges, I am doing it at different levels. So
right.
You are addressing
right.
different people at different levels of maturity. Yeah.
Right. So there are also citizen groups that will engage people, not just at the school level, but sort of for anyone who, for example, if you're a gardener, if you're interested in gardening, there's a project, it's called Project Bud Burst, and it's, you know, like bud, like a kali, and so it's called Project Bud Burst. And what you can do is, if you're a gardener, you go anywhere, and you notice some things about your environment, you can just fill out some of these information. It's like an app, and you can just fill it out, and you give it to them, and you say, this is where it was. They find the latitude, longitude, they find the points to it. And all of that individual information makes up a big data set for the scientists. So it's also a deeper level of engagement that you can do just living your own life. I mean, yeah, it's good to, you know, cut down on the plastics and all of those things, and those are all individual actions that we're taking to destroy the planet. So we can certainly take some of those actions to keep the planet from being destroyed, right? So you can decide to use paper straws or not use straws. Good place to start for citizens to go beyond plastic bags. And trees do a lot of things. They don't just help with climate change, which of course is huge, but you know, they help to stabilize a watershed, so your erosion issues are mitigated. So they help to, of course, provide the oxygen, and they sequester carbon dioxide, so they absorb carbon dioxide, so they sequester carbon. The soils in forests have actually sequester a lot of carbon, which means, so when I say sequester, I'm saying that they actually can absorb and keep it there. That helps us for reversing climate change. And they provide shade, they look beautiful. And so they have a lot of uses, and trees are wonderful to start with as an action, because they also, you can create a forest. But it of course it has to be done again through in an organized fashion, so you actually grow these trees and they actually live, right? So you don't want to, it has to be implemented properly. But those are great projects. In Hawaii, we're also using those that method, which is to reforest and to plant trees. We're trying to do it on state lands as well. So here also in India, if the forestry department has lands that are not forested, that would be a good place to grow trees. If there are places where you cannot use trees, that would be a good place to have solar farms, maybe, if you cannot grow anything else. and it's sunny, so that would allow you to then generate electricity in a renewable, clean way. So I think those are all kinds of farming in the sense of solar farming and growing trees. Those are all good things for climate change action. So.
Technology we are using as of now to make our life more comfortable itself is actually worsening the situation as far as the future is concerned. How do we communicate that to people so that they become more economical in using it?
Just that if you have a common resource that no one actually pays for, but everyone uses it, they abuse it, right? So, and then it goes downhill, so then you don't have the resource anymore. And it's in no one's interest to actually try and make it better. So, and it's in everyone's interest to make it better. So it's not in an individual action, but it's in that collective action that change will happen. So I think a lot of this can happen also through the private sector, which is looking at innovation and in technology. So, you know, if you're an engineer, I think that is a place you can work. If you're anything to do with building, construction, transportation, all of these sectors, they can all do with people who are conscious about climate change. So it would be interesting, I think, for companies as part of their corporate social responsibility programs to have climate change orientation to their engineers and their architects and all of those folks. But at the same time, there need to be laws put in place by the government and policies by the various executive branch departments to say that, yes, the Department of Transportation, for example, needs to have, when it builds roads, it needs to make sure that it's using a certain kind of cement or that doesn't emit as much greenhouse gases. So it's that combination of government policy and laws, and then the private sector also orienting, so that's their education again, but not at the primary school level, but at the institutional or company level. So I think that those programs to reorient engineers, architects, builders, because this is all part of that construction and our modern way of life that's brought this about. And we're not saying, well, if you tell someone that you should stop doing this, that's not going to go over really well. That's not a way to convince someone that you should stop using air conditioning and you should just sit at home and be hot. You know, that's not going to affect anyone. So what you want to do is say, yeah, you can use your air conditioning, but it's coming from solar. Or, yeah, you can do what you want to do, but it's all coming from clean, renewable fuels. You know, you can. Now, the fact that if everyone gets in a car at the same time, it's going to be congested, that's a different problem. But the problem is right now that those cars do create a big chunk of greenhouse gases for the world. So, you know, in India, cars are just expanding the consumption and I think the consumption of cars, of houses, of air conditioning, just consumer goods, that's just going up, right? And that's a sign, again, of economic progress. So it's very difficult for countries to say we will stop progressing at the economic level just because of climate change, right? And the message I have is that it's good that, you know, to be conscious of what you're doing and not use plastic bags, because this is a problem. What we've done is our own individual consumption, right? So it's good to not use plastic bags. It's good to be conscious of composting and recycling and not use so much energy. But at the same time, you're just one link in a big chain of things and that need to happen for climate change action. So if you are not connected to another link, it will never form that chain. It will just be a piece that's floating out there. So my message is that you need to be linked in, and that action needs to be coordinated and coherent and organized. So why was Mahatma Gandhi so successful? You know, he was able to talk to the layperson. That's one reason. But the second was not just talking to the layperson, but actually organizing for action. And he had his own example as well. So there were three things, right? And so I would actually take that as I would use Mahatma Gandhi's strategies for climate as well.